I'm losing track. I don't know where I am. I don't know what episode it is. Axle episode. Let's call this the axle episode. So one of the reasons that I went with the Showa forks, axle diameter is 20 mil, which is pretty standard. But on the right hand side of the bike, we have the bigger section. The factory Honda forks are 25 and the cabs are 25. So our axle here is 25 and 20 here. So what that does is lets me use the factory axle. So in the grand scheme of things, doing a full fork swap, having a new axle made is not a big deal at all. I do ride a lot locally, but in a previous life, I did ride to a lot of faraway exotic places around the world trip in 2009 and down through Mexico, Central America a few years later. And it's important to me to be able to get parts easily. So the fewer things that I need to custom make for this conversion, the better. So being able to use the factory axle, if there's an accident and something happens, I mean, an axle is something that's pretty durable, so unlikely I would ever need to replace it. But just nice being able to use the factory parts. So I decided I want to use the factory wheel if I could. The nice thing about it, we have 310 mil wave rotors on here. Obviously with the dirt bike forks, we're going to be running 1 caliper instead of 2. So having the bigger diameter is good. If I went to a dirt bike wheel, they're significantly smaller diameter, and you can get 300, 310, 320 for the dirt bike stuff as well. But this does save some money, so we'll just end up pulling one rotor off and using the one on the left hand side of the bike. And yeah, being able to use the factory wheel again, factory wheel for the bike, so it's factory seals, factory bearings, etc., is just nice to keep as many Honda parts on here as I can. Just makes the whole conversion simpler. So what we're worried about, or what we're looking for, is the spacing with the wheel between the triples. The fork is tighter to this rotor than it is to this rotor, which makes a lot of sense if you look at the fork lugs. This one is offset from center towards the inside of the bike, and this one is dead center. So it makes sense that the wheel is pushed to the right. So I've taken, I don't have a lathe here, so I can't just turn this guy down. I've just taken a piece of tubing for now, and I've made it, it's a 3 1/4 mil shorter than this spacer. So with that shorter spacer now, I got 10.5 mil between the fork leg and the rotor, and we've got 10.5 mil on this side. So I've got the wheel dead center between the two forks, which is awesome. Using the factory axle and one of the factory spacers, again, awesome. So the only thing is that the axle is inside of the lug by about 7.5 mil. So the axle has got a 17 mil hex, and you put a hex in here to hold the axle when you tighten the nut down. It keeps the axle from spinning. I've never had an issue with it, so I could just put a piece of round tube on here and save some time and effort. But if we're going to do this, may as well do it right. So I'm going to grind a bevel on here, and I grind a bevel on the socket, and then I'm going to put a nut in between here so I get the hexes lined up, and then I'm going to weld around that, grind it close to good, and then we're going to have to take it to the machine shop to get it turned down because I don't have a lathe here, so it needs to come down about 1 millimeter, and we're going to get the wheel spacers cut down at the same time. So I didn't touch the very edge of this, which is going to keep it straight and true when I attach it to the axle and make it easier to machine. Ooh, that's hot. So we're going to take a socket, we're going to take a bolt, we're going to take a nut that's 17 mil, the OD, and this one's rusty, and I specifically picked this one because it's a tight fit in here. A nice clean 17 mil nut, rattles around a little bit, but this one has just a hint of interference. So you got the rusty nut in there in the hex, so it's going to keep the flat sides of the hex lined up, and then we can weld that. I'm going to measure the overall length of this axle before I weld it, because I know that we need to be 7.5 mil longer. And once I have this welded together, I'm not going to know where the axle ends and this starts, not precisely anyway. So then I can do the math after the fact. 242 millimeters. 242, so we're going to be 249.5. When we're done, we're going to call that 250. I don't usually weld on the ground in the garage, but I've got a loose vise here that I'm going to do it. It's just a little bit easier to shoot video. We can go straight down, and I don't have the height to do it on the bench. Don't be a dumbass and weld in short sleeves like I am. Not recommended at all. I'm going to give this a shot of anti-splatter. I don't want to get splatter all over this, especially the threads. Makes for easy cleanup after. Whew, that's hot. Damn! Of course I just welded it. Why wouldn't it be hot? So we're going to measure out our 250 mil and stick it in the bandsaw and get it turned down. Or cut down, I should say. So 250. 250 is right about there, right where the zip tie is. So I'm going to put it in the vise because this is 25 mil, this is 20 mil, we got 2.5 here. I'm going to have to shim it up to keep it straight. So we're going to cut this a little bit long because I'm going to end up facing it on the lathe when they do it, so they can clean it up. If I cut it right on the mark, then if any of this ends up out of square, then that's going to show on the axle. We'll drop that off tomorrow and get that turned down and squared up. Alright, so we got our spacers turned down. This is the factory spacer here. And then we've got our new one here. We've got our lengthened axle back as well. So this is 8 millimeters longer. So we've got the wheel on our bike. Axle is sorted out. Wheel spacers are sorted out. Centered on the bike. We're off to a good start. Watch us again next time when we start doing other stuff. I don't know what we're gonna do next. So then, oh come on, you fucker! So I decided I wanted to use the factory wheel if I could. Wing night.